Welcome to Kuja Pro Revenge OP. Share a story of dealing with an entitled neighbor. Just flipping through a few stories and reading about entitled drivers getting their just desserts. This made me think back to my days as a paramedic. We got a call to a house where there was a bariatric patient who had fallen. The patient was morbidly obese and weighed around 30 stone, 420 pounds. This story isn't really about them though. There are many reasons people get to this size, and I've never judged, only helped. No, the problem here was a really arrogant neighbor we had come across before, and boy was this chap a judgmental moron. Our patient had a car and had a disabled parking permit. They also had a council-designated disabled parking spot outside their home, which the neighbor kept parking in. There had been a number of letters from the council regarding this, and a number of parking fines just served to annoy this chap even more. On the day of the story, I took the call that the patient had fallen, and we went to the house. Sure enough, the neighbor was not only parked in the disabled spot, but had parked a second car blocking access to the patient's driveway. I assessed the patient and suspected they had a broken hip, so needed to go in. I sent my colleague round to the neighbor to ask them to move the cars, and when they came back I was told the neighbor had just told my colleague to do one. No problem, time to get the message home. I radioed through to our control center and asked for the fire service and police. We needed the fire service to help lift the guy and the police to do a little parking control. The fire service were the first to arrive, and I spoke to the crew commander to let them know what the situation was. A fireman went to the house to ask the neighbor to move the car, and was told the same as my colleague. The message was relayed back, and the watch commander just asked me one question. Is the patient's life at risk? I knew exactly where this was going, and it was time our thoughtless neighbor got the message. My answer was, yes, there is equipment I need to get into the house, and the driveway is blocked preventing me doing so. The watch commander told the fire truck driver to move those vehicles. It was really satisfying to see both vehicles being pushed down the road by the fire service, and the look on the neighbor's face, as he came out spitting and screaming, was well worth seeing. His complaints to the police fell on deaf ears. They were well aware of his history of obstruction, and my clinical assessment that the patient's life was in danger was more than enough justification for the vehicles to be moved. I doubt it made our patient's life any easier, and sadly they died a few months later without leaving hospital, but it really did bring a smile to their face as we wheeled them out. Something English. There is nothing better than seeing a fire engine push cars around like nothing. Well, 1632. Seeing the look on the car owner's face when they are presented with the bill for the damage their cars caused the fire engines is a nice bonus, though. Mock the disabled? Justice is served many years later. This is a story about a piece of shit receiving their deserved karma several years later. Many years ago, I worked in the lovely career of retail. It's sadly normal for there to be a constant flow of shop scum that make you despise their existence, and there are those that are so horrific that what they do is burned into your mind forever. Fortunately, one of these unforgettable moments allowed me to extract my revenge. I had only worked in retail for 1 year in this newly built store, and was starting to settle in. Getting to know the great customers, and understanding that some people shouldn't be allowed outside, which being a shy person who hates conflict wasn't the best, but at least one of my customers was an absolutely adorable elderly lady who always made time to talk and was an absolute joy to be with. It had been some weeks since I had last seen her, but one morning I see her car park into the disabled parking bay, as she already has a blue badge, only this time she hobbled out of the car on crutches with a pot on her leg. I didn't have chance to talk to her yet when a works truck, which did not have a blue disabled badge, pulled into the disabled space next to her, and out jumped an early 40s builder with their teenage kid. Well, this little old lady was having none of this, and must have absolutely massive balls of steel, and stood up to this ignorant builder, and politely informed them that they shouldn't be parking there, as it's for the disabled and he doesn't have a badge. What happened next? I can't forget. This builder decided the best course of action was to humiliate and insult this poor elderly lady in crutches, accuse her of faking her disability, and claim the cast on her leg was a fake, and that she probably milks the benefit system for as much money as possible. Then walks off putting on an overdramatic fake limp, laughing away with their teenage kid, whilst the old lady stood there in shock. Sadly, being one who lacks courage, I did absolutely nothing about it, and that would stick with me forever. I tried feebly to ask a manager later to do something about it, but they didn't care or want to get involved. For years, I worked in this store, always seeing this scum builder come in and out. Fortunately, I never interacted with this scum builder, but I saw them often, and every time I did, I would always remember what they had done vividly. I would still see them park in the disabled bays, and even got to the point where I would recognize them by the large blue Mercedes they drove. 7 years later, I was still working in this store, and this scum was still parking in disabled and looking like an absolute cunt. Yet this year I was blessed with good fortune, and our store was outfitted with some absolute joyful equipment. Due to the high number of complaints, our store had set up a company to deal with the parking violations. But instead of having external parties coming in and ticketing cars, the staff of the store were given the ticketing machine, and it was our duty to go to the car park and record any cars that violated the parking rules. This was all done digitally, and there would be no paper tickets upon the cars. This was brilliant. As soon as I found out, I knew what I was going to do. It didn't take long for me to learn how to use the machine, and it certainly didn't take long for the opportunity to get revenge, and so it began. There were 3 rules for parking, and if you break these rules, there is a lovely £80 fine in return each time it happened. The first rule: no parking in disabled without a badge. And I know well that the scum builder is certainly violating this rule, and it wasn't long until I saw him next, and as soon as he entered the store, I quickly scurried out with the ticketing machine, and lo and behold, there was the oversized blue Mercedes in the closest disabled bay with no badge. I smashed them car details in with some well-shot photos and sent the report off so that they would receive a lovely letter of their fine they would ask to pay. That's not enough though, but fortunately it takes weeks for them to finally receive the ticket, which grants me the opportunity to constantly ticket their parking violations. Because as you would expect, the scum would always park in disabled. And as I worked at the front of the store, I would always know when they had parked. After ticketing their car dozens of times, the scum unfortunately learnt their lesson, as their oversized blue Mercedes no longer appeared in disabled parking bays. But as you expect, the scum would still be scum, and they would find their new parking space inside child parking. Rule 2: don't park inside child parking without a child. Had this scum gotten enough, I thought? Of course not. They haven't learnt their lesson and continue to be a complete wanker and park in the child parking, which we didn't have many spaces for. At this point, I knew all their car details by heart and would gleefully fill out the ticket machine as I skipped over to their car violating the child parking and take the photos needed for them, including shots of their cat seats that bear no child seats in them. And as it became routine, this once again carried on a few weeks more of tickets being created, and eventually they start receiving the fines. Fortunately, me being me, I am completely invisible to others and often looked over, and I have yet to be seen or caught. But as all good things must eventually come to an end, when the scum came into the shop, their blue turd automobile was no longer there in child parking or disabled. Has the scum finally learnt their lesson? Would you be surprised if they had not? As it didn't take me long to find them. Rule 3: you must park inside a marked bay. And what a surprise, the scum still manages to fuck this up. They would park over the line, taking 2 spaces up. Well, guess what? That's a job for me and my ticket machine. Trying to park inside taxi parking but can't fit the big-ass car in it? Boom, that ain't inside a marked bay, and catching another ticket and fine for the Have one single wheel slightly over the white line of a bay? Well, guess who technically broke the rule? That's right, Scumbag did. And there goes a few more weeks of fun, until eventually Scumbag runs out of ways that they can possibly break the rules, and our company hires externally to start ticketing cars, so my beloved weapon of justice goes to rest. Now I know what people are probably going to say, that all these fines are not enforceable because of blah blah blah, but I honestly don't care for a few reasons. Firstly, I'm being paid to do this, so either way my time or money isn't wasted. Secondly, it did have an effect as they repeatedly changed their parking habits. And thirdly, even if they don't end up paying, they are still going to spend a fuck ton of the time and effort trying to overturn them over and over again, having to constantly be harassed by mail. Overall, if all the fines are counted separate and added up, they would have received thousands of pounds worth of fines, building up over time for being scum. Cherry on the top, about 3 years later, I walk by this piece of scum on the car park and watch as they scream at some innocent dude in a high-vis jacket, accusing them for being the one giving them all parking fines. Which put me at peace, knowing this must have seriously got to them and caused them to still be raving mad after 3 years. Be abusive to employees. Say bye-bye to your job. My former boss was, simply put, an absolute fucking asshole. He was the type of person that had the ability to be so condescending while acting as if he was doing you a favor. His condescending attitude was sometimes downright abusive, and he seemed to have a particular problem with all of the female employees. He acted as if they were dumb and needed assistance with every step. He loves to scream at people regardless of how little their mistake was, if there even was one. He was a slave driver and expected everyone to sacrifice their own personal lives for their job. The thing that sparked this revenge was him telling me to miss my older sister's birthday to come into work on a day that I already booked off. No one liked him. Me and all of my colleagues in the department, around 10 or so, couldn't stand him being here anymore. So we did the protocol. All of us piled together the evidence we had of him not sticking to booked off holiday schedules, having inappropriate and sometimes abusive language, and we brought it all on one Google Doc. This was step 1. Step 2 was getting a cherry on top. We did this by getting him to do one of his screaming tantrums at one of us. We wanted this to be as damning as possible, and the youngest and smallest girl out of all of us volunteered to be the bait. She made an intentional beginner's mistake in her paperwork, something bound to get her roared at. And the idiot took the bait. You see, he likes to do his scoldings in front of all of us to prove a point or rule by fear, as he called it. This gave us the perfect opportunity to film it from behind our desks and add to the Google Doc. Now you see, in our company there's this really not well-made email system. You can send an email to an entire department, and I mean entire, as long as you have its name and manager's name. But the thing about this was the fact that all of this information was completely and freely given to employees. This means that a person could send whatever email they want to the entire company, including the CEO. So one morning at 10 a.m., to ensure that as many people would be working as possible, we made a burner email and sent the Google Doc through an email to everyone in the company. It took a little while as there were many departments to get through, but we got there in the end. We gave the email the subject: boss's name, vital information, branch name, department name, dot. Of course our boss received the email as well, and you could basically hear the clutter from his office, as people all over the company were contacting him to ask him what the hell this was about. HR did a light investigation into him and took heavy disciplinary action. As far as I know, he wasn't directly fired, but instead he resigned. And a month after that we never saw him again, and he was replaced by a new guy who was also an asshole, but just less of one. His expressions during the whole ordeal helped me sleep at night.